Leonardo da Vinci, who was a naturalist and was just looking at birds and looking at people and inventing things. Or the guy who invented the Chinese characters, he was a naturalist. It's only analogical that the mind has to reflect reality. And that's why I showed you all those pictures of the buildings that I was involved with, including this building, where we did a complete remodeling with Len Davenport, and who knew how important it would be to me.
I have to tell you, Charlie.
You gotta go.
I do. I'm not supposed to be driving after dark until my operation in April. I'm so sorry. I'm fascinated, but maybe I'll just have to come
I'll give you
visit
one last sentence.
Okay.
That the metaphor of the mind of Manhattan, if you've heard of something called germs, guns, and steel,
Oh, yes. Yes.
my classmate.
Really?
And I now think, and you can picture this, roads, rooms, and floors. And that gives you a visual picture for what we're talking about. Thank you for coming, Annie.
Oh, I'm so sorry, but I will
We don't want-
get in touch with you and we'll finish
I
it up.
hope the picture I showed you of my car crash inspired you to get out of here.
Anyway, no, I was fascinated by what you've been doing, and you know, even since I've been here the last time,
Okay.
not far away. All right, nice to meet everybody.
Yes.
Nice to see
And,
you
Be
again.
careful.
Yeah, I'm not supposed to be here quite this,
So,
but I'm doing it.
bye-bye, Annie.
Bye-bye. See you later.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
So, each of these directions, the up Fifth Avenue, that's the road. And I think of that as a way to imagine the creative problem-solving process as a protocol. And the rooms in these buildings either side are like memory palaces. And the floors are the levels and layers for the platform. What technology did was that they, out of Xerox PARC, where all the great technology came out of, we were Xerox PARC East when Xerox acquired us. And they acquired us for our brains. That was what the Wall Street Journal said. The brains, I figure, are finally have aged. They're perhaps fermenting. But now is the time to have Xerox PARC East come through with the technology that can save humanity, and not just blithely let technology outsource it so we have the same role as sort of a pet cat or a pet rock even. It turns out that the pattern recognition user interface is the next interface for the computer. It's not just the graphical user interface with a desktop metaphor, and Windows, using that metaphor, the Windows operating system has the same metaphors that rhyme with what I'm building. So it's not that we have to throw everything away from Skinner. We can build on top of it and make it really bloom. After the whole framework, I see that it was pretty disorganized. It was like it was highly organized, but not possible to memorize, except on a one-off basis, the memory palace at 57th Street and 5th Avenue. You have to memorize a lot of different buildings. And so, if you could digitize it, you would be able to see to use this metaphor, to have the streets of Manhattan in a digital form. And I'm planning to use SketchUp's Fifth Avenue, what's behind you, could be the past, when you're in the intersection. And that's where we all are all the time, in the imperative of now. We're all at a crossroads. And we all have a past, we all have a future. There's no getting around it. But by using Google Earth, I think Google SketchUp Pro, which we have already downloaded based on our 501c3 status, and I was starting to think about building the prototype last December. Andy Fair and I were involved with sharing AG in Berlin, spending those millions of dollars. We were clueless, but we spent the money, and now that those millions aren't quite available quite yet, but they will be, I had the breakthrough to say, how could we make those streets regular? How could we make them simple, systematic, and symmetrical, so that you could take this to an abstract view. And I started working on a pre-prototype, which did not meet the whole brain criteria. And not only did I enjoy that waffle, but I realized that, in fact, there was another metaphor for the streets of Manhattan, and left and right. And if you stack 10 of these things on top of each other, you had the whole waffle. From there, as you'll see these little cues that are on the table, I realized that to replicate the streets of Manhattan, and the roads, and the rooms, and the layers of floors, that if you used a Rubik's Cube, then you would have an abstraction, so that the representation of it was simple, systematic, symmetrical, and shareable. And that it really was a counterpart to what Tim Berners-Lee had done for the World Wide Web. Charlie's conceptual cube can do for the mind of humanity. And instead of letting the technology companies with their billions and trillions of dollars get away with saying, we're going to solve all your problems, get everyone else on the sidelines, that we have a new user interface, which is a pattern recognition user interface that will connect the dots. Humanity and technology, the brain and the mind, be an auxiliary mind that, once we've digitized it, using as part of our criteria this view of the mind as 8 Rubik's Cubes, 5 by 5 by 5, and I put the thing over it so it would represent that it's all encapsulated inside of the head and the brain of it. So when I looked at one Rubik's Cube and the 3 dimensions, and trying to take the little signs I know about Cartesian coordinates and figure out where the x-axis was, from the back of the brain to the front of the brain, the y-axis from the left side to the right side, and the z-axis up and down. So suddenly you could put your hypothetical harebrained mind could be put in scientific nomenclature and be investigated. And the framework, just as the World Wide Web had Charlie's conceptual cube, CCC versus www, the internet had as a counterpart the framework. And if the internet was HTTP, Hypertext Transport Protocol, Elliot knows about that.
Yes, I do.
And so does Julian. Also, the APPP for the Atkinson Protocol Palace platform, roads, rooms, and floors could have as a framework APPP. Once you had those specifications right, you could turn to the technology people and say, build all your software so it is not just alphanumeric symbolic, but it is truly pattern recognition user interface plus alphanumeric symbolic. And so I've worked out a simple scheme that lets you do that. Yesterday, I found on Kindle a book called A Clickable Moment, and he had used a Rubik's Cube to talk about it. On Morning Joe, 2 weeks ago, I found that Mark Halpern was saying, we need a new conceptual framework, some kind of a Rubik's Cube, so we can connect the dots, so we can look at things from different points of view, and not just left wing, right wing, conservative, progressive. How, and unless you can look at all these different points of view, all the rooms they're in, and organize it in terms of the floors, and then look at the federal government as the executive branch, the departments, maybe the organizational departments, the Congress as the policy strategic thinkers, one short term, one long term. Using the metaphor, you can begin to see how you could hold Washington accountable. To hold Washington accountable, you have got to flip the dilemma. That is, instead of having the choice, will I vote for Hillary? Will I vote for Donald? I fortunately had an easy choice. There was only one Fly Club guy in the Bill Weld, with a guy who couldn't keep track of the facts, didn't know where Aleppo was, and I voted for Johnson and Weld.
So did I.
And I would have voted for. I mean, I'm all over the lot. I would have voted for even Bernie Sanders, and certainly we had what we call the Cambridge Caucus of January 31st, 2016, 4 years later. And Dan Hogan came, and we got another Fly Club guy, Pell, Haven Pell.
Oh, yeah.
It was unanimous. We were for Bloomberg as the one we could live with. Anyway, the Rubik's Cube here was not about using the Rubik's Cube as a metaphor of the mind, but what he calls intersectional creativity, where two different fields come together. That's where he found all the creativity happens. He's got a big company, he's been adopted by Nike, goes on and on and on, but there's my Rubik's Cube, and he's only got it in 3 by 3 by 3. So the functional framework, people thought of the white box as when you knew what was inside the box, it was a white box. And the closest we got was the whole brain profile that Andy and I and Charlie Downer, it now, and it was led to Singapore and IBM. IBM has had 100,000 people profiled, but it's a two-dimensional model of the brain